And we should be live. Hello, everyone. If at least one person in the chat wants to let me know that you can see and hear me, it's always good to double check. And we'll get started here in a minute. I'm just going to make sure that we are all set up and streaming in the right places. And I saw Timothy in the chat, at least I think right before we went live. How are you doing, Timothy? And yeah, we'll get started here in just a minute or so. I'm going to wait for several more people to probably join in. But while we're waiting, if you want to let me know in the chat, I don't know how you're doing, maybe where you're watching from is always kind of fun to hear about. And if you want to share a little bit about maybe what you're working on, I assume people here might be working on large language model projects. Feel free to share that in the chat. It's fun to hear a little bit more about the audience. And I am streaming from Seattle, which it doesn't look like it's raining right now. And again, we'll get started here in just a minute. And as you're joining in, again, if you want to say hello in the chat, maybe where you're watching from, what you're working on, that'd be great. So make sure we have our link is sent out. Raymond said, "Good morning. Sorry you missed yesterday. I assume you were talking about the book club yesterday." Someone said, "Is it about model quality assurance?" There's some kind of quality aspect to it, but we're going to look at kind of a high-level intro of monitoring large language models, and some of that can be definitely quality depending on which type of metric you're looking at. So, for example, I haven't seen one silver bullet of monitoring for LLMs yet because they're so broad in what they do and depends on your application. But so, for example, one common thing is looking at whether like a readability score or something like that is coming out of your model. That would be like one quality metric I would be looking at. So I'd love to hear actually more about like what you would be looking for in a quality metric, I guess, for a large language model, probably is what I assume you're talking about. And all right, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the slides. I'm sure more people will join in here shortly. So this is intro to LLM monitoring. We're going to be talking about some concepts through some slides, but then we're going to go and do some hands-on coding as well and actually implement some of the topics that we're going to be talking about. So a couple links for you to get set up if you want to do the follow along part. And all these are in the description on YouTube, by the way. So if you're watching the stream on YouTube, you can go ahead and go to the description below, and all these links should be down there as well. We're going to be using Google Colab to run our code today. I assume most people probably already have a Google account. So probably the only account you'll need to create if you want to follow along with everything today is a free WhyLabs account. There's no card or anything required to sign up. So it should just take a minute to verify your email. And you can also do this a little bit later when we get to the hands-on part. And then if you want to check out the open source tool we're going to be using today, which is called LangKit. And then this is the notebook that we're going to be running through. So if you do want to run all the code today, you might want to make a copy of this notebook. And again, I'll share these links again when we get closer to actually running all these, but this is in case you kind of want to get a little prepared or you want to take a look at the stuff we're going to be running here before we get to it. And I'm going to share these over in LinkedIn as well real quick, and then we'll get going through the rest of the slides. And I saw more people join in. If you want to say hello in the chat, maybe where you're watching from, maybe why you're interested in large language model monitoring, or maybe what you're even just building with large language models. That might be cool to hear. So I'm going to just share these in the chat, and then we'll get going through the rest of the slides. And I'm sharing these in the LinkedIn chat now. And again, if you just joined in, all the links should also be in the description on YouTube. So if you're watching the stream on YouTube, you can get them down there. All right. So just a little bit about the agenda today. We're going to do a quick introduction. We're going to go through setup, and then we're going to talk about some large language model pain points that people may have experienced if you've done things with LLMs in production or just evaluating them. Then we're going to take a look at LangKit, which is our open source project for monitoring LLMs. And then we're going to do some hands-on examples here, running everything through a Colab notebook, and should be pretty fun. Quick introduction about myself. My name is Sage Elliott. I'm a machine learning and MLOps evangelist at WhyLabs. We are building tools to enable AI observability and ML monitoring. Some people also use our tools just for data pipeline monitoring. It doesn't necessarily have to be a ML application. And for over the last decade, I've worked in software or hardware and machine learning, mostly with startups around in Seattle, but also some other kind of interesting companies that were around in Central Florida. And just in general, I love making things with technology. If you want to stay connected, feel free to do so on LinkedIn. It's probably one of the best places to contact me, or the Slack channel that's in the description below. I'm in there all the time as well. So if you want to ask me any questions, whether it's about something we're going to talk about today, or just about technology and stuff in general, feel free to reach out. I love doing robotic stuff as kind of a side hobby, and I haven't done as much of it lately, but I'm trying to change that and get a little bit more into some hardware and tying in some of the recent AI stuff with hardware, which I think will be a fun kind of project. So if you like doing robotics or anything, let me know as well. I always love talking about that. And I saw more people join in. So again, say hello in the chat. Maybe put it where you're watching from, and maybe what you're building with LLMs. If you have a project and you want to throw it in the chat, that's really fun. And also, if you want to throw in like what types of workshops you would find useful, feel free to let me know as well. Like if you want to see maybe building a specific LLM app and maybe how to monitor metrics for that specific type of application. So like one thing I'm doing is working on some more kind of end-to-end content, probably of like building a summarization app or something, and like what are some of the things you might want to monitor in those cases. Let me know in the chat like what you're working on or what you'd kind of want to see some content on maybe. So summarization is a big one I see when I talk to people, and also doing things like chatting with documents and stuff like that. So I'll be creating some more content like that. But if you have anything specific, please let me know, and I'd love to hear about it. And then again, you can stay connected in the Slack channel that I just shared again in the chat, or you can join in the description below and introduce yourself there. A little bit more of a permanent introduction. It'd be cool if you want to introduce yourself in the chat here as well. But if you want to kind of say hello there, you can stay connected with other people in the industry and other people that come to the workshops. So quick setup again, and it's perfect timing because I saw, I think, double the amount of people join in. So again, these links are in the description if you're watching on YouTube, but the only thing you'll probably need to do, I'm guessing, is create a free WhyLabs account, which is one of the tools we're going to be using today to look at some of the data. There's no card or anything required. Should just take a minute. I think you have to just verify your email. If you want to go check out the open source project we're going to be using, you can find it on GitHub. And then this is going to be the collab that we're going to be running today. First, we're going to go through a few more slides just to make sure everyone's kind of on up to speed with some of the concepts that we're going to be running in code. But if you want to go ahead and peek at those things, you're more than welcome. If you want to check out our GitHub, and I always appreciate a GitHub star as well on our open source work. So please check that out. And LangKit is also built on our other open source library called WhyLogs. That's all about data profiling and creating really efficient data profiles that you can easily set up like monitoring and data quality validation on. So someone asked about data quality earlier, and we won't be setting up, well, we'll kind of be setting up validation with guardrails a little bit later for an LLM, but there's also a lot of data quality features built into WhyLogs. So I don't think you ever said what type of model you were monitoring. So you might want to check out WhyLogs or LangKit, depending on the type of data you're kind of looking at. Let's go talk about AI observability at a high level. Here's kind of just like a little tiny simple graph of like a pipeline where you would have things like your model training and inference, et cetera. If you've ever put a model in production, you'll have some sort of pipeline, or even just when you're training a model, right? It could be basically, you could call it a pipeline, where you're training a model, you're bringing in data. You might be retraining that model and looking at some sort of evaluation statistics to make sure it's better. When it's in production, or even maybe in the evaluation phase here, it's pretty common that you're going to have some sort of tool to collect AI telemetry. And if you're not, you probably should look into doing this, where you're going to collect things like distributions, missing data, summary statistics, different things about the model that you're putting in production. And we'll see kind of what that looks like for LLMs today. And then you want to store those statistics somewhere on some sort of platform where you can make it easier to, visualize them, forecast, query that data, monitor them. With that data, then you're going to probably do something like create those reports and dashboards if you want to gain insights of like what's going on. Again, often maybe in production, but you can also do this in like the evaluation phase. And then you would have alerts and notifications. So if you put a model in production and all of a sudden, in this case, we're talking about large language models. So let's choose some sort of metric like the response sentiment went really low, which could mean that, your chatbot or whatever your application is putting out responses that have a really low sentiment, and maybe it's being like rude potentially to your customers. You might want to go check that out. Or there could be like a jailbreak attempt, and there could be some sort of jailbreak similarity between a prompt coming into your large language model. You might want to trigger some sort of alert there. Or a big application right now is LLM security. And one thing I see a lot of people talk about with security is monitoring for patterns that might match PII, or like phone numbers or emails, et cetera, right? Like these models are trained on a lot of data. Sometimes people try to kind of extract that information out. And sometimes I've also even had it happen where like I set up, I think it was OpenAI model, and for kind of a customer chatbot thing on an online store. And when a customer was like angry, saying like, "Oh, I didn't like this product or whatever," and it actually spewed back a phone number, even though I never told it to. So it kind of had a phone number either stored in it or just kind of made one up on the spot, and that's not good for me because it's telling them to call, a phone number, and it didn't exist, at least not for the business. So being able to kind of pattern match these things and catch it that like, hey, your model is doing something maybe a little bit interesting. You should probably go investigate this further. You can catch all that kind of here in this monitoring of the output. And so the way we work and how we're going to see it today is we're going to use our open source library called LangKit, which is built on top of our other open source library called WhyLabs. And both of them operate in a way where they just contain privacy preserving statistics. So when it comes to tabular data, you could think of this as like the min, the max, the mean, et cetera. It's a little bit more fancy than that. And then with language metrics, we'll see what it looks like here in a minute, but it'll capture things like sentiment and toxicity, jailbreak similarity, et cetera. And then you can easily add in your own custom metrics as well. And then we'll store that in the WhyLabs observability platform today. So what is ML monitoring and AI observability? So if you've been to other workshops or heard me talk before, you might have seen me talk about any number of these things, where it's pretty common that if you put a model in production, you're going to experience something called data drift, where the data coming into the model really no longer matches the data that it was trained on. So that would be like, your model probably isn't making as accurate of predictions anymore if the data coming into it doesn't really match what it was trained on. And then for LLMs, some of the common things here would be like monitoring for jailbreak score, sentiment, toxicity, and then readability, or kind of a prompt to response relevancy. But basically, you're taking some metric over time, looking at it, and we can actually visualize this in a time series view, which we'll see how to do today. But we'll also see how to set up a monitor. So this could be like a manual threshold you define, or it could be something like, hey, if this drifts a certain amount of distribution from what I'm looking for, trigger an alert. So we have a saying, bad data happens to good models. No matter what, as much evaluations you do and guardrails you set up, potentially you're probably going to see something kind of weird happen later in production. So it's usually really good to have some sort of monitoring or AI observability system in place to catch this faster, hopefully, than your customers would, and then you can hopefully mitigate it very quickly. So one quick example too is, I've done this with a computer vision system in WhyLabs before, where you had a classification model, and when the images, I think, got really dark or kind of corrupted, it would trigger an alert saying, or sorry, actually, it was just like, I think it was a darker image. So the training distribution no longer really matched the production data, even though it could make predictions still on that data. It wasn't horrible data, but we just want to take that new data, label it, and retrain our model with it. So you could create an alert or a monitor in WhyLabs, and we saw that the distribution of the input images no longer really matched the distribution of the training data set. And when that happened, we could trigger a automated workflow that would kick off a data annotation task, have crowdsource annotators annotate that data, and then they'd actually bring that new data in, retrain the model. And then you could do something called shadow deployment, where you deploy that model back into production data, even if it's not making predictions for the user itself. And then, over a couple days or a week, you could compare which model actually performed better. So that's kind of one use case of monitoring that's pretty cool. And also, a lot of this stuff we always talk about, like, oh, bad things can happen, and that's totally true. But also maybe your model isn't terrible, and you just want to look at ways to improve it. So you can, again, look at things like today we'll be looking at some LLM metrics, and maybe you just want to improve your model over time. So maybe it's doing fine, but you want to make it exceptional. And if you know which metrics to monitor for, you can basically look at what's happening in production, make tweaks to either like fine tune your model, or in the case of LLMs, often that's done with system prompting, and maybe learn how to make a better system prompt to optimize for that metric that you're monitoring. So we saw a little bit about LLM, or a little bit about monitoring. Let's tie it more into LLM. So you're likely familiar with them at this point if you're at this workshop. Some common use cases for them are like building agents where they can interact with tools, chatbots, summarization, Q&A with some sort of document or information. And again, if you have a project, let me know in the chat what you're working on. It'd be interesting to kind of hear about what other people are doing with LLMs right now. So what are some of the common pain points with them? You've probably seen some sort of hallucination where you get irrelevant or inaccurate responses. And prompt engineering is often hard to know basically how to improve your system prompt. So again, if you are new to this, usually you might have a large language model like from OpenAI, their GPT model, and then you provide it what's called like a system prompt at the beginning where you're telling it how to behave. And these can be really long. You can add a whole bunch of different things in there. You can do something called few-shot prompting where you even have examples of an input and output. And it's kind of hard to tell how this is doing. Like you can take a set of golden prompts or prompt it yourself and see how it responds to the prompts that you gave it. But when it comes to production data, you might want to kind of monitor this over time for those metrics and then maybe improve your prompt, or because changing a prompt is pretty cheap, it's just another API call if you want to look at two of them instead of, fine tuning a whole model and deploying it. What you might do, and what I've been seeing people doing, and I think this is going to be kind of the future of prompt engineering, is create several versions of that prompt and then look at it on production data, maybe over 5 days or a week or whatever you feel like is good, and then see which prompt performed better and then deploy that one to the user. So you could have like 5 out there. Only one is actually giving the responses to the user, but then you saw there's another one in production that you actually think is going to be better, and you could deploy that out. So I think this is what a lot of people will probably start doing if they're not already doing it in the future. Of like, it's just another API call. Now I can compare 2 models together or 2 system prompts and then pick the best one for my use case. But it is hard to track. When I talk to most people right now, how do you track it? Or how do they know that the update, made it better? They're kind of like, well, I just, I did a couple spot checks and I think it's better. Output validation. Again, this is a big one when it comes to kind of security use cases where you want to validate these responses. One, you can like do things like relevancy like we talked about, but also a big thing is security right now, or just outputting data that you like is more sensitive. Like I mentioned the phone numbers before, or emails, or some sort of PII. So you can set up validation on the output. You can also set up validation on the input. And then based on that, you could set up a guardrail, which is, basically you're telling the model if it contains any of this or reaches a certain score, don't give a response back, or don't pass that response because it contained a phone number and email, and we don't want to give that up. And then just monitoring for that actually over time. Like I'd mentioned, I didn't think my model would be giving out phone numbers, and then I was able to catch it because we had pattern matching in my just general observability for my LLM, and it was able to tell me that it was giving out a phone number, and then I could go fix this later. So I already kind of talked about these, but setting up guardrails. So again, you could set this up on prompts or responses. You'll see this a lot. Like, I think it's the big reason why people often say, GPT-4 is decline in quality. I know there's been a lot of research and papers on that. And one reason is potentially more of guardrails. Like, I think I just saw someone post about how it doesn't give as good dark humor responses anymore. And maybe that's not what they want your model to do. So one common example too is if you're building a chatbot for your tax service or something like that, it probably shouldn't be giving things like medical advice or dating advice. And so you can actually kind of categorize these prompts and then say, yeah, that actually looks like advice I shouldn't be giving. I'm going to say no to that and not give you a good response there that's generated. And we've already talked about kind of evaluating and observability. I think I just kind of talked about them in this last slide of how we could fix that with prompt engineering, model comparisons, and then sentiment and readability kind of over time, or just general pattern matching. So how do we solve this at scale? That's why we built a LangKit, which I'd mentioned a couple times. And again, the link to it is in the description below if you want to go check out the open source GitHub project. It can integrate basically with any large language model. And we do have an official like LangChain integration as well. But really, I think one of the cool things is just how easy it integrates into kind of any Python library running in LLM. And same with WhyLabs, it can kind of integrate with any ML library. And so how LangKit works is you have prompts that go into your LLM. You have responses that come from your LLM. What we can do is, again, it doesn't matter which LLM it is. And then we're going to extract metrics using LangKit, the language toolkit. And then with those metrics, we can do things like look at the quality, sentiment, potential security issues of that data. And so it kind of allows us to enforce all the things we've already kind of talked about. And again, it's open source, so you can go change it. You can see exactly what's going on. It has integrations. And then also really important is it's extendable. So if it doesn't have a out-of-the-box metric, like we'll see today, I think there's something like 16 for both prompts and responses. If the out-of-the-box metrics doesn't work for you, you can extend it with your own metric. So it's really flexible as well, depending on your need. And it kind of works like this. So here's a prompt coming in. Then we're extracting some sort of metrics from here. And so these are some of the out-of-the-box ones. It contains response relevancy, has patterns. Those patterns look at if it contains email, phone number, I think it's like social security. There might be, credit card is in there as well. But again, you could create your own metric for any type of PII information. We have sentiment, again, both on prompts and responses, toxicity, jailbreak similarity, categories, difficult words, reading score, and more. And so we kind of took a whole bunch of out-of-the-box metrics that we think give you a really good baseline of maybe how your model's performing and can give you insight of both how users are using your LLM, but also what responses are looking like. And then again, it's very easy to add custom metrics because, again, there isn't one single metric I've seen that can really tell you exactly how your LLM is operating. And I'll reiterate that it's also privacy preserving. So again, we'll see what this looks like, but these don't contain raw data, right? These are just kind of metrics around your text, which is really important for a lot of industries like healthcare and fintech. Obviously, also may be important for other industries, but those are the two that often kind of bring it up all the time. And it's easy to use, and we'll just see this in, I think, the next slide. We'll actually go and run the code, but I'll just bring up, you can just pip install this into a Python environment. We're passing in just a prompt and response. It can be a dictionary or a data frame format. Again, we'll go ahead and run the code here in a second. And then with that, we can extract all those statistics that we talked about and saw here. And then we can like visualize them over time in an observatory like WhyLabs and even set up a monitor. So if something, does drift quite a bit, it can trigger and we can go either investigate our data or have it automatically trigger something in our ML pipeline. And we'll also see how we can automatically kind of gain some insights around that data as well. Like, is there negative sentiment? Is it imbalanced? Does it have patterns? We'll see this in action. And on the next slide, I will share and we'll get started with the code. But I also want to bring up, so we're going to use the free plan today. You don't have to sign up for this right now to follow on the workshop, but we do have a coupon code if you want to check this out and get 30 days free on our enterprise plan. You can do so. I'm going to share those links real quick. Again, you don't need it to follow along on the workshop here, but you'll get more features like team features. You can have way more projects, and you can also set up monitoring on hourly, whereas what we're going to do today is on daily batches. So enough slides. Let's go ahead and get on with the code. So again, if you haven't already, you can create a WhyLabs account. Again, this is free. There's no card required or anything here. And then this is going to be the demo notebook. So this is going to be the code that we're running today. So I'll give everyone a minute to open that up. It should look something like this. Let me zoom in here. It's probably good. Once you're here, you can go to File, save a copy in Drive, and this will give you your very own copy of the notebook. So feel free to edit code, play around with prompts and everything as we go here. And you can always bookmark the original link, and then don't worry about breaking this essentially. So, and again, if you're joining a little bit later or you're watching the recording of this, the links to all these things are in the description on YouTube. So you should have a copy. Was anyone able to open it up and make a copy that wants to follow along? All right, I think someone said yes. Great. All right, so you can scroll down. This has some useful links. So again, maybe you're coming back and watching the recording of this. You can go check these out. The Slack channel is going to be good to ask questions later. Not during the workshop. I won't see them. Keep it in either the LinkedIn or YouTube live stream chat and I'll see them. But if you have questions about this later, that'll be a good place. So let's go ahead and run this first code cell. See, all it's doing is printing hello world. If you've never used Google Colab before, it's basically Google's way of hosting a Jupyter notebook. It gives you kind of a whole little instance to run all this code on. And you can actually see it took a second here to initialize our instance. And now we have this kind of whole Ubuntu instance where we can run code and see kind of our code, output, and visualizations all in one place. So I ran this. It said hello world. Let's go ahead and run the next code cell. We're going to pip install some of the libraries we're going to use today. By default, Colab comes pre-installed with a whole bunch of the popular libraries like scikit-learn, I think PyTorch and TensorFlow, several like that, pandas. But we're going to install transformers by Hugging Face, and we're going to install Gradio, which is also maintained by Hugging Face right now. And then we're going to install LangKit, which is our open source library that we talked about for extracting language metrics. So transformers is a really popular library for running large language models or language models in general. And we're going to be looking at how to use one today, but also how to bring in really you want from Hugging Face. Gradio allows us to kind of quickly make a little interface for our app. So we'll see this in action as well. So you can actually kind of make a little chat app or some sort of large language model app pretty easily with a little interface. So this is done installing. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at what these metrics look like in LangKit. So I'm going to import LLM metrics from LangKit and WhyLabs as Y. And then I'm going to initialize LLM metric and assign it to the variable schema. The first time you initialize this, it'll take a few seconds here because it's kind of downloading a couple models in the backend to extract things like sentiment. Once you run this the first time and don't restart your notebook here, it shouldn't do this again. So it just takes a few seconds the first time you run it as it's kind of initializing those models in the backend. So here we're going to load something called example chats. This just contains 50 examples of prompts and responses. We'll actually see what they look like here in a second. And then we're going to log them. And so again, don't worry, we're going to do this again down below, but we're calling y.log. We're passing in chats. Right now, this is a data frame. It can take a data frame or a Python dictionary format. And then we're giving a name. This is the optional for most profiles. And then we're assigning the schema here. So we're saying, instead of just a regular YLogs profile on something like tabular image data, we're actually passing in this language schema from LangKit. And don't worry about this initialize session. There's a new feature where you can initialize YLogs to do something specific, and we just didn't do anything. So it's going to be just a local file right now. And if we run this next code cell, we're looking now at the results. So we got those language metrics extracted with y.log. And now we're kind of viewing that in a data frame here. So we can see there's a whole bunch. If you scroll down, I think it's about 33. And we can see the cardinality estimate for each one. So let's just take a look at this top one for now, reading level cardinality estimate. So there was 50 prompts total, 17 of them. There's basically 17 different values of reading level though. And if we keep scrolling through, we can see counts as 50. We can see the distribution max for that reading level is 28. The mean is 7.5. The median is 8, etc. So we get all these kind of aggregate statistics about our data set. And with these, we can set up all kinds of different monitoring techniques like we had talked about kind of during the slides. And we'll, again, see this in action as we run through here. But just kind of bringing up again, now we just have these kind of aggregate language metrics, not the raw data here. And so it's a cool way of having a really lightweight profile that's also privacy preserving, which is really neat. And these are what the chats looked like. So we had a hello world, et cetera. You could read through these if you kind of want to get maybe why the sentiment was high or low, et cetera, on those metrics. So let's go ahead and actually bring in a large language model, though. So from Transformers, the library from Hugging Face, we're going to import GPT-2 model and the tokenizer. And GPT-2 is obviously kind of an older model right now, but it's a really easy model to run on just any CPU instance, and you don't have to create an OpenAI account or anything to run it. So this will just be really easy for anyone following along to go ahead and run all the code cells without having to create other accounts or having a GPU runtime or anything like that. So that's why we're using GPT-2 today. But just want to mention, you could bring in really any model from Hugging Face. They have most of them kind of already in there, but you can also bring in different tokenizers or different models if you download them. So you could bring in Llama 2, for instance, which is probably one of the other more popular open source libraries, maybe the next popular from what I've heard and stuff of what people are using outside of OpenAI. So here's some code of just what that would look like. But today we're using the GPT-2 because it's so lightweight, we can run this very easily. So let's create a quick little function here called GPT model. It's going to take in a prompt. We're going to we're going to encode that with the tokenizer. Then we're basically just going to get the output and get the actual response, which is the decoded tokens from the GPT-2 model and Hugging Face. And then we're going to store this in something called prompt and response. So we're going to take that input text and output text basically from the model, and then return both of them in a dictionary format. So if I run the next code one, and again, feel free to change these prompts out yourself and see what happens. And GPT-2 is kind of funny. It gives very interesting responses sometimes. So I'm just going to say, tell me a story about a cute dog. And it can take a few seconds here. Just again, we're running on a CPU runtime, but it is lightweight enough to go ahead and do this. So we can see we have a dictionary. This is my input text, and then we have response. It's kind of, I think right now, just kind of by default trying to complete a whole sentence and making up a story in this case. So let's look at how we could now extract those metrics out of our model there. Just like we did before, we're importing LLM metrics and WhyLogs. We're initializing our language schema again. And then I'm passing in that dictionary that we created up here, prompt and response, and then initializing it with my schema again. And if we want to look at it, we can see that we have, count of 1, and the cardinality estimate of unique values is 1 because we only have one prompt. We can scroll through, and right now, the distribution, or like the min, the max, mean, is all going to be the same because we just have one prompt in here, right? So it says, the reading score was, I think, 1, which I think is not great. I think it's a pretty low one. And then I think this was reading score. But you'll see, these distribution metrics aren't up or down or don't have any boundaries, like upper and lower boundaries, just because we had that one metric in there right now. And you could look at all these other ones too. We'll see them in more detail here in a second when we go visualize them. But there's a whole bunch, like the relevancy, all those ones we talked about in the slides. So let's look at just adding a couple more prompts to get the metrics there. So here's just kind of a list of 3 more prompts here. And then what I'm going to do is just loop through each of those. And then because we already initialized the schema of our profile above, what I can do is just call this .track method on our profile. And what this is going to do is just extract those metrics from their little list here of prompts and then add them to it. So then if we look at our metrics here again in LangKit or from LangKit. We can see now the cardinality estimate is 4. The count was 4 because we added those 3 more and we had 1 above. And now we can actually see that, you know, the max, the mean, etc. is changing here because we actually have a distribution now of like min, max, mean of all these different scores. And like I mentioned, you can add custom metrics to this. So we'll take a quick look at that later. But if any of these just don't work for your model, out of the box metrics, or you want to add more later, like typically this might be good to get started. And then you might come up with a better metric or combining metrics and then want to have that into like a single value. You can pretty easily do that with custom metrics. So now we saw how to extract these metrics, but let's look at how to kind of actually start using them and getting a lot of value. I mean, it is maybe valuable for us to look at this and kind of do a quick check, but let's see how we can more easily visualize them and set up things like monitors. So if something does drift a lot or change, we can send an alert to us, or we can go ahead and trigger some sort of workflow in our pipeline. So again, we're going to use WhyLabs now. So if you haven't already, you can create that WhyLabs account. Again, free, no card required. Oops. Forgot Colab does this now. Let me just get this link for you. Also, I love this cute little dog animation walking around when it says you're leaving Colab. So you'll need this account. We're going to go get an API key from it, an org ID, and a dataset or model ID here in a second. I'll give everyone just a second to sign up if they haven't already. And I'm going to take a drink of water. And I saw some other people just join in. So if you do want to kind of catch up or look at the code that we're running through, the Colab notebook is in the description below. Or if you're on LinkedIn, it's in the comments. All right, so I'm going to open up my WhyLabs dashboard, and mine looks like this. I have some existing models in there. You can actually see some alerts have been triggered on an app that I'm monitoring. From here, what I want to do is create a new resource for us to monitor. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create resource here. And I'm actually going to go ahead and delete 2 of these models that I had before. So I'm on a free plan right now here as well. And it says I'm over the limits. And I'm going to go ahead and delete a couple. And we might actually want to do 2 for this workshop. So I think if you sign up for a new account, I think there might be 2 kind of example models in there. So you might not need to delete one yet, but you might want to delete one later. So what I'm going to do is just hit delete on here. Confirm. And then I'm going to create a new one. I'll call this LLM workshop. And I'm going to select from resource type, large language model. You can always go edit this later if you didn't pick the right one or you forgot about it. I know I've done that before. And what this does is really just gives us a little bit of a different interface to view our data in. So we know it's going to be a large language model, so we'll get some specific features for it. So I'm going to hit add a model or data set. Now we see I have my LLM workshop, and my model number is 291. Yours is probably going to be, I think, 2 or 3 if you're new to WhyLabs. And what I'm going to do is go back to my notebook, and I copied that model ID over. So I'm going to paste it over. Make sure when you copy it, sometimes you might accidentally grab an extra space or a new line character. Make sure that isn't in your code here. So we can see there's no spaces or anything like that in my string, and I'm assigning the dataset ID there. So go back to WhyLabs. From the same tab, I'm going to go hit access tokens. And from here, I can create a new API key for me. And I'll call this, I'll just call it LLM workshop too. You can also call this whatever you want. Created my API key, go back to my notebook, paste in the API key. Now, org ID is actually at the in here as well. So I'm just kind of copy after this colon, but I'll also show you where to get it on the page. So if you go back to the WhyLabs page, you'll also see that it's 2 places in this page. It's right here in this text, and it's also always right here. So if you want to get the org ID from the page, you can do so, but it's in the API key as well. And I think it might even be in WhyLabs right now. I need to go update this workbook probably of, I think you, instead of setting these separately now, we'll be able to extract that. But I'll have to double check that that's out. But that's why it's like this, because if it's not out in WhyLabs, it's coming soon. So I want to make sure I run this code still now and just set up my environment variables. Obviously, this works great for a notebook here. If you're running this as like an actual application, you probably want to save these in some, environment file and then pull them in and make sure you don't accidentally commit that to GitHub, for example, if it's a public project. And was anyone able to get that data or get those keys? I know sometimes I go a little fast or people are still signing up, so I'll go through it one more time. So you can go to create resource, type in here, create a new model, select from here that you want a large language model. And then that'll give you a model number that's over here. And you want to copy that over. From this same window, you can go to access tokens, type in a new name for your token. It'll pop up here in a little blue thing. You can copy that over. And then on the same page, org ID shows up under that, but also it's always right here. And now it's also in the API token. And you can always get to this page, so it's easy to get there from creating resource, but you can go in the hamburger menu. You can always go to settings, model and data set management, and that'll bring you to this same area as well if you ever need to get your tokens again or see what's going on in there. So I'm going to go back to my notebook. I ran that set my environment variables. Now we're going to do very much what we did before, except for we are importing something called a WhyLabs writer. And we initialize our language metric just like before. And then here we're doing the profiling exactly like we did before as well. But what we're actually doing here is initializing the WhyLabs writer. We profiled, we extracted all those metrics out of it. And now we're going to push that profile with all those metrics up to the WhyLabs platform. So we can see it worked. And we can go back to the platform here. I'll refresh. So, and then if I look here, we can see that there's some sort of batch profile here. I can click into my model. This dashboard gets more interesting the more data kind of coming in here is. We'll look at these tabs as we go. This will get more interesting as we pass some more data as well. But we can already see that on our prompt sentiment, for example, here, we have one profile and it just says a median score. And if I go to Telemetry Explorer, click on any of these, I'll do reading score here. We can see we have one profile. Again, because we just have one profile, it doesn't have the min, the max, et cetera. It does, but it's all one score. It's all 0 in this case, our reading score. But you get to click on any of these other metrics. Like, let's just look at prompt sentiment. We'll be looking at this. And we can see that the median, the max, the min, et cetera, is all 0.57. So this will get more interesting as we write more prompts and responses. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to scroll down. And let's go ahead and run these next code cells, and then I'll kind of talk about what's going on. All right, so run this last one as well. What we're doing here is we have a list of 7 lists, and I think inside each list is 3 prompts. So we're basically simulating our model being in production for 7 days with these 7 lists, and we're going to import date time, and then we're going to loop through all those prompts and do exactly what we did before, where we're profiling with WhyLogs here, and except for we're getting the prompt or response each time from our GPT model, and then writing those up to WhyLabs. And the only thing we're really doing different here is because we're looping through, we are subtracting a day from date time for each loop. So it's going to write backwards, and we're going to have like 7 days of production data essentially. And then we're going to set the date timestamp, so to that date time as we subtracted a day. By default, if you write up a profile, it's always going to be that date and time that you wrote it up. But here we're going ahead and subtracting a day. So it's going to, again, make it look like we had a model in production for 7 days here. And with those metrics, so again, we can do things like LLM security, prompt engineering, experimentation, and I think we'll see what this looks like a little bit here in a second, because we'll actually make another model, and then you can input all the stuff you want and kind of compare those metrics to another model. And this takes a minute to run because it is going through 7 times 3 prompts. And again, it takes a few seconds to run each one with the GPT-2 model just on our CPU instance right now. Someone said they had to head out. They said it was great, though. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ben, for coming out. And I'm glad you had fun, even if you have to leave a little early. Totally get it. Also, just noting, if anyone wants to come back and if you did have to leave, The recording is always going to be at the same link here. So if you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can just come back to the same link and the recording should be there. All right, so my code cell stopped running. Let's go back to WhyLabs. I'm going to hit refresh here. And we can now see that we have this kind of time series view of our data of both the median, the min, the max, et cetera, all those metrics that we are extracting. And we're still on prompt sentiment right now. But you can go ahead and click on these if you want to look at what the distribution looks like for the other ones. And then if for some reason when you refreshed, it did not automatically change the date view and you're just seeing one profile, you can always change date views here and select which, like how many days you want to view in your time series view here. So now we can see, I'm just going to manually inspect here. And if you're following along, you should be able to easily see this, but I'll zoom in here. So here we can see, let's just look at the median in this case, but we could also look at the max and min, etc. Median on this first day is 5.6, 4.6, 5.6, 3.8, which is a bit of a dip. And then here 5.4, and then this is a huge dip. This is negative 72. And then this is 62. So this one had a big sentiment dip here. And in this case, we're monitoring the prompts coming in. So this would be from the user, but we could easily be monitoring this as a sentiment value or toxicity value from our responses. So this might be a really good monitor actually to set up. Like if you don't want your model to be putting out anything with a really low sentiment, you might want to set up a monitor like this or be looking at your data from your responses and say, hey, that doesn't look really good here. You know, our model is giving very maybe potentially rude answers or angry answers to people, and maybe that's not the experience we want. Or maybe it is the experience you want for your application and you want to optimize for it. I don't know what you're building, so potentially that could be a use case. But this is cool. We can visually see what's going on here. We gain a lot of insight just by inspecting, you know, these prompts and responses. But like I mentioned, we might not want to be manually looking at this data all the time. And this is where we can set up a monitor to trigger either an alert that will tell us, hey, you know, something went on here that we think you should look at, or you could trigger something to happen in your workflow, right? So we have a PagerDuty integration. So if it went really low, you could even actually potentially try setting up like GPT or something to create a better prompt, system prompt or something like that. There's a lot of interesting use cases right now of like tying your LLM kind of back to either the same LLM or a different one and almost optimizing it with AI, which I think is really exciting. And you, so if any of these metrics work to better optimize your model, you could actually try doing something like that, like have an alert trigger and then maybe tie back to another LLM model and potentially, you know, change a system prompt. But let's look up how to set up a monitor so we don't have to manually view our data to see that there was a big dip here. So I'm going to go to setup monitors. Now we have some presets here. You don't have to click into this one if you're following along. I'm just going to show you. So this is what a preset monitor looks like. For jailbreaking, it gives you this this JSON, and you can go edit this however you want. It has a little helper bar here too that says like, oh, you need to change this out to get it to work. And you can always go in, hit new custom monitor, go to JSON configuration, and really set up with the JSON monitors any way you can think of. So if there's some data in here that you want to monitor, have it do something, JSON's going to give you like a lot of flexibility of how to set up these monitors. For this workshop, let's go ahead and hit new custom monitor. So this is where you will want to click this if you're following along. Let's go to UI Builder. And what we're going to do is right now the prompts and responses are all considered an input column in WhyLabs. And we're going to detect if data drift is happening on an input column. And we want to look at the entire data set, but you can also do something called segmentation in WhyLogs, and that allows you to kind of put data in different cohorts or classes, and you could be looking at specific segments. And then we want to be looking at non-discrete data. So discrete would be like if you're detecting categorical predictions. Non-discrete would be like those metrics we've seen so far, like sentiment changing from, you know, -1 to +1. And we're going to be looking at all columns of this type, but you can manually select one. So if you can actually, if you wanted to just trigger on prompt sentiment or response sentiment, you can select that, which is very neat. In this case, let's just go ahead and set it on all of our columns that are of discrete value. And then I'm going to make this a little bit less sensitive. So the lower this number is, the more sensitive the monitor is going to be. I'm going to say, only trigger if it's a big amount of drift happening. And then next, we're going to be looking just at 7 days of data, which works in our use case. We only have 7 days here anyway, but you could be looking at the last 90 days of data, or you can have something called a reference profile. So, you can also select a specific date range. Reference profile is really good, especially when it comes to kind of tabular data or maybe even computer vision data, where you really want to compare the input of your model that's in production to the previous thing, like a training data set. If you do have a training corpus of data, that might work really well for an LLM. Most of the time, I don't think people have that data, at least starting out. So I'd recommend probably starting with a trailing window, but it depends on your use case. And then we'll just leave this default, but it gives us some options here of like, we can set this as low, high, medium, etc. That's really just to tell me when I create this model, is this like a big deal or not a big deal? And then we can select actions. By default, email's already here, but we can set up things like a Slack integration or a PagerDuty integration to trigger things in our pipeline. I'll just hit save. Now, if we go back to our Telemetry Explorer tab, and let's go look at that prompt sentiment again here. And let's go ahead and hit preview on our monitor. We can see that on that day where it dipped, it triggered an alert here. So now, instead of us having to manually go in and see, was there like something, a drastic change, we're able to set up a monitor that was able to kind of catch that big change and then trigger an alert. Or again, that could also trigger PagerDuty and some sort of workflow. And again, this is really good for kind of general observability, seeing how your application is performing over time with these metrics, seeing how users are interacting with your application over time. Again, like this is a prompt sentiment. So like, why was it so negative on one day? You could go investigate that. And all right, so real quick before we move on to a couple other things in the notebook, was everyone able to get this to work? And maybe what do you think about it? Does this seem pretty interesting, or maybe like a useful tool for monitoring your ML models? In the dashboard view, this gives us kind of a little bit of a just different view of our data. And we'll actually use this in a second to compare models together. Oh, and also the Insight Explorer is pretty cool. We don't have any insights right now, but if we had something that was like super negative, it would show up here. Or if you had patterns that matched like credit cards or anything like that, it would also show up here. And they'll also show up in the dashboard. So right now we don't have anything that's like really triggered yet, but they'll show up in this dashboard here. And actually, we'll see, you could try to trigger that here in a second. So I'll keep going to the notebook. Someone said this seems very interesting. Awesome. Glad to hear it. Let's go back to the notebook. Here we just printed out all the prompts and responses. And you could ignore this if you want, but if you wanted to go investigate why something triggered, you can look at those prompts and responses here. In fact, the last time I ran this, it did generate emails, and so that was actually caught in that little insight tab there, but today it didn't. Again, LLMs are a little unpredictable. I should probably put that in a prompt to easily show that it catches it each time. All right, so let's build a quick little app here with Gradio. So we're going to import Gradio as GR. Let's create another model in WhyLabs, and we can actually now compare those LLMs together when we create another model. So create another resource. I'm going to do exactly what I did before. I'll just call this LLM Workshop 2 and select large language model. And then I'm going to copy that new model ID over, which now is 92 for me. Paste that in. Again, make sure you don't get any spaces or new line characters here. I'm going to set it. And I don't have to set the API key or org ID again because we already set that previously. I'm just updating the model. So now when I write to WhyLabs, it's going to go to a different project. And here I'm going to do, I'm going to run this. This is doing very much like what we already saw when we were kind of writing backwards or just writing one profile to WhyLabs, except for we're we're using something called Gradio. Like I mentioned at the beginning, is a really cool library for building simple kind of machine learning interfaces here, machine learning app interfaces. And Gradio is also maintained by Hugging Face. So here now we can type in a message. We have a little sliding bar. This sliding bar is going to tell how many days to subtract from our profile date, just like how we wrote back 7 days of production. This allows you to kind of do that manually. So you can kind of quickly see, what it looks like or how to trigger these types of things. So let's go ahead and say 6 days ago, so about a week ago, I'm going to say, I love you. And we'll submit, and then we'll get our response. And it just said, I love you. Fantastic job. Again, GPT-2 can have kind of some funny responses. And then let's actually do something again. Just so we can have, I like the product a lot. Again, this will just give us a little distribution here. So then if we went back to WhyLabs, okay, so let's go back to WhyLabs. Let's look at our new project, Workshop 2. And let's just look at the Telemetry Explorer tab again. And let's look at, in this case, we'll just stick with that prompt sentiment. It's the easy thing to kind of control here for the example. So we can see now we have the upper and lower threshold here for those two profiles that we did. And then let's go ahead and go back and change this to be today. And I'll be like, I hated the product. Again, takes a second here. And it's writing like a little review for us. Again, I think the GPT-2 model by default is just kind of doing a completion here. Let's do another one. You are stupid. Obviously, here I'm just kind of trying to trigger our sentiment to go down quite a bit. And if I refresh now, we can see that, we're starting to track those things over time. So this is kind of a fun way for you to play around with seeing what's going on with these metrics. And you could also try to trigger things like, give me a phone number. And let's see if it even generates one. And then like this would be something that could be caught in our insight pattern matching. Or maybe it'll refuse. Yeah, I don't think it actually generated one here. But if it did, that's something that can show up in kind of that pattern matching insights here. Oop, it has one insight now. It says our has a mean of 82 overall positive sentiment so far. That's probably going to go down as we keep writing more negative. And I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that little thing. But yeah, this is really cool. Gradio is really fun. It allows you to kind of get this little interface right in a notebook, or you can run this as an app, not in a notebook. But if you want to play around and kind of writing to WhyLabs and extracting those metrics, this is a kind of a cool way to check that out. All right, so let's go through a couple more things. We're going to show how to use LangKit. One way you can use it to set up some guardrails. What we're going to do is import LangKit and YLogs like normal. LLM metrics, we've already seen this a whole bunch of different times. And I think I actually did that above. I don't need to run this code cell again. If you do run it again, it should be fine. And then here, I'm creating a simple little function. What we're doing is, in this case, we're just profiling the prompt. And we're going to get all those metrics out of there. There's actually a different way you could do this a little bit where you're just going to check one individual metric. But in this case, we're going to create a whole little profile like we've seen before. And then we're going to access those metrics. So I guess we've seen the data frame, but we actually haven't seen how we could pull out those individual metrics and use them in our local environment here. So I'm going to create a profile dictionary by calling to summary dictionary on that specific column from our profile. So that's then going to give me that min, max, mean score here that I can access. And I'm going to call just getting the max. So we're going to profile one thing here. We're going to get the max score. And then I have a little thing here. You could change this number. It would depend on your application and what you think is toxic or whatever. In this case, we're just going to say if the toxicity is above 0.5, return false that it, and this is called is not toxic. So if it's false, that means it is toxic. And it would, if it's true, it does mean it's not toxic. So let's run this. And then let's pass in a prompt here saying, do you like fruit? very low toxicity, 0014. And then we'll say you dumb and smell bad. It's a really funny combination of words that isn't too awful sounding, but actually has a really high toxic score here. Again, you can play around with the text and see like what triggers toxicity, what triggers not toxicity scores. And then we can tie this together. Again, this is just one simple little use case. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could do this. But in this case, we're just going to run a little if statement here saying, if the prompt is not toxic, then go ahead and pass that prompt to the model and then return the response. And here it went. So pass it through because it was a very low toxicity. And then here we'll say, we'll try to do this. And it very quickly, it's like, nope, that was a very high toxic prompt. So I'm not even going to pass that to my model. I'm just going to say as a large language model, ... This is kind of what a lot of the LLMs do. If you try to pass it something that it doesn't want to answer, right? It says as a large language model, like I can't help you, writing malware or something like that because people have these guardrails in there. What was I going to say? There was something I was going to bring up. Oh, so in this case, how we did this is, we're looking at the prompt and then we're just not passing the prompt to the response. I would say most people that I've seen using guardrails like this, again, might depend on the application and what you want to do, but are probably passing those toxic prompts, or you could like check jailbreak similarity. What you might want to do is still pass that prompt to your model, just never return whatever the response is to the user. That can give you more data of how your model actually responds to that. So if someone is trying to jailbreak, you can say, ooh, that looks like a jailbreak. We don't want to send whatever the response is to our user, but you might want to evaluate, did it actually jailbreak it? Did it not, for example? So probably in most use cases, I feel like when I've talked to people, they'll pass in something and they'll just make sure that the response never goes to the user. But again, it depends on your application. If your LLM has access to, do something on your file system or whatever, maybe you wouldn't want to pass in the prompt at all if you think it could cause some sort of havoc in there. There's some other ways of doing this. You can check out some built-in features in LangKit called validators. Oops. I always keep forgetting that it does that really long collab link when I share it in the chat. And then again, if you want to do custom metrics, very easy. I'll probably do another workshop on this later. But you can just kind of bring in some different imports from WhyLabs, and then all you really do is have this decorator around your function. So here we're just saying register metric UDF. UDF is user defined function, and then that's how you create a custom metric. So this could be anything from detecting like your own custom jailbreak score from a vector database, or it could be something simple of seeing like, what language is this using a different model. And all you do is create a function, have it return something. Whatever it returns is going to be passed into LangKit and then become a value in there. So if you want to do, a custom metric around jailbreaking is a big one, because we do have a jailbreak similarity score that we generate based on some known jailbreaking prompts, but you might have a larger database or something more specific to your use case or industry. You can create your own custom metric for that and then return either a label or a proximity score from the vector database, or maybe both of those, and then store those as custom metrics and then do monitoring just like we've done before. And then you don't have to run this, but just as an optional way of using WhyLabs that's pretty common in production is you would initialize this just like we did before, but we're going to use something called a rolling logger. So we're going to say the mode is rolling. This case is going to write up every 5 minutes, but a lot of people don't need to write up data like every second. And if you have users, in this case, using your LM all the time, it might be a lot to, write multiple profiles every second. So instead, you're kind of catching them all in one bucket here. And then at the interval, you're going to write them up to WhyLabs. So in this case, it'd be 5 minutes, but you could do this, hour, etc. And then the other stuff we've seen, like passing in the schema. And then you just call .log like before. And then if you call .close on the rolling logger, it'll automatically write everything up when you close it as well. But otherwise, it'll go in that interval that you set it. So there's a lot of other resources here. We've kind of covered all the stuff that we had set for today. One, if you have the notebook, you can request a workshop certificate. And then also there's other examples. So if you want to check out, some other intro to LangKit examples, LangKit and LangChain integration, that's all on our GitHub here as well. And then I'll share this one more time as well. If you want to get the enterprise edition of WhyLabs, like if you liked what you saw here, but you want some of these other features like hourly monitoring, etc., you might want to go check out this and get a promo code for 30 days free with it. And I'll stick around here for a few minutes if there's any questions. And again, you could also just tell me what you thought. Does it seem pretty interesting? Do these metrics seem interesting? Do you have a metric that you want to be tracking that wasn't in there? One, you could do that with a custom metric, but I'm always looking to see, what are other things that people are using. So other common metrics that I see people using that I'm experimenting with myself is like blue, rouge, and BERT score are some things I'm messing around right now with an application that I'm building with OpenAI. And that gives me some different insights into, the readability, or in my case, like I'm building a summarization app and I want to make sure that the summarized text, does a good enough job. Like it's still similar to the whole text that went in, but is obviously shorter. So there's different metrics I could look at. Like if I went into an out of the box metric, I might want readability to make sure that like my summarized text is still very readable. The point is probably to have a good readable, shorter text. And then I also might want to look at things like character count would be a good one. Some other, reading scores, obviously, potentially jailbreak and stuff like that, but like the character count, letter count, etc. That might be interesting for me to look at. And then readability scores. And then I would want some sort of score probably to make sure that my summarization is doing a good enough job. And that's where I'm experimenting around with some of these other metrics. So again, it depends on your LM use case, the things that are probably going to have the most value to you. But I think the out of the box metrics from LangKit do a pretty good job of giving you like a baseline of like, is anything toxic coming in or out? Is it readable? How long is it? Are there patterns? Are there any of these types of security issues? A lot of that kind of comes out of the box, which is cool. Yeah, any questions or any comments about what you'd want to see about monitoring? No questions so far, but I still see quite a few people in the stream. So I'll wrap up. If you don't have any questions, and if you do have questions later, again, you can join the Slack channel and ask them there. Someone said, so interesting, waiting for more sessions. Awesome. Yeah, I know. Just created another one for, I think, 2 weeks from now. That is on, we go into a lot of more features with WhyLabs, and we'll use a tabular data set, but we'll look at things like segmentation and monitoring for bias and fairness with segmentation, as well as logging some explainability, and a little bit more on the open source side. Like we'll go into the like quality checks, like how you can kind of write a unit test with WhyLogs on your quality. And then I think I'm going to do a workshop. I haven't posted yet, probably later this month, and actually go through like building the summarization app with OpenAI, and then like kind of the stuff that we want to monitor for that. Someone said, you mentioned PII, and they said, what about identifying users anonymously for repeat usage or abuse? Great question. So I think right now, you could probably do that with a custom metric. Like if you have a user ID, and you might be using this in some other telemetry store too for like your application, but if you want to throw it into WhyLogs and WhyLabs, I think you could do that by basically assigning a user ID to the user and throwing that into your metric that you're logging with a custom metric. And the anonymous part of there would probably be like, again, just you assign an ID or a number to them. And then you could basically see, I don't know if I had a categorical example in here right now. I don't think we had a has pattern trigger, but yeah, if you had a categorical thing like numbers, you could basically assign a number, I think, to a user ID and see like how many times has that user ID done a prompt. And that'd be kind of an anonymous way of doing it, I think. But again, it depends on how your application's built too. So if it's just open, like if you just have a chat thing open to the web and no one needs to create an account, then I don't know how you wouldn't do that if you or you couldn't do that if you didn't have some way of identifying it. I guess you could do actually, maybe again depends on your application, but maybe taking like the IP address or something like that. Yeah, I think one of my favorite things right now too is using it. Oh, I also forgot to show. So we have those 2 models now if you were following along. So actually I have 3 because I have my summarization app as well. But we have, let's see, we're in workshop 2 right now. Let me go back actually. I'm going to go into workshop 1. Go to this dashboard. And one cool thing I can do here is compare 2 models together in a split view. Select a time range. See, I think same time range should be fine. We don't have as much data here, but now I can kind of quickly compare 2 models side by side. So this is neat for, like I was talking about, if you're changing system prompts and you want to kind of monitor over time of like, is this improving the metric that I want to look at? Like maybe it's response sentiment or patterns. Like one of these maybe it was producing phone numbers and you change the system prompt to say never give out a phone number. Then you could basically look at 2 models over time and then maybe deploy the model that you think is performing better. So I think that looking at this in production data, like this is also great during the evaluation phase of your LLM. Like you could evaluate what prompt or what fine-tuned model is giving you better results here. But I think it's going to be really cool of like changing a system prompt, seeing how it performs in production over time, and then selecting that best model to put out to your users. Any other questions from people? Again, just as many people in stream. No questions so far. Well, I got some questions, but no other questions. So I think I am going to go ahead and wrap up the stream then. Someone said, that's really great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And again, if you have questions, join the Slack channel or connect with me on LinkedIn and feel free to ask me questions later. I'll share my LinkedIn one more time as well in the chat. But Slack or LinkedIn will probably be the best place to contact me. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out. And sounds like some people thought it was pretty interesting, very cool. I think it's interesting. I think it's awesome. I think it's going to really change the way that like we make better prompts and ensure that our LLMs are performing as we expect in production. And the open source stuff's really cool. So definitely check it out. Give us a star. And hopefully I will talk to some of you all next time. And great to see you again, Timothy and Raymond. Hopefully I'll see you at another book club event. I know we've been doing kind of a weekly book club. You can usually find it on my LinkedIn or on one of our robust and responsible AI meetups, where we discuss different books. Actually, maybe I can go ahead and pull the link here and share it as well. The next one is going to be next Tuesday, and we're currently reading natural language processing with transformers. Let me grab the link real quick. Right, yeah, if anyone's interested in stopping by and saying hello at a book club, Timothy said, heck yeah, he'll be there. Awesome. Yeah, I love it. It's been really fun. There's a cool group of people now, and I feel like I learn a lot just from hearing other people talk about it. It's also been a really good way to make me actually like read chapters of a book, because then I got to go talk about it as well. So check it out if you're interested in joining it. Otherwise, again, I'll wrap this up and hopefully talk to some of you next time. All right, everyone, have a good rest of your week.